All right, so I've been going through the book of Hebrews, and the other day on Friday, I think it was Friday, I was reading Hebrews chapter 12, 15 through 29, and that was like the second half of Hebrews 12. And so I'm almost done with the book now, but there's been like two common themes and then like a way the author's written it. So the two common themes are that he's made a really big point to focus on what faith is and how we have to choose to have faith through God when we don't understand or when we don't know why something's happening, and prayer, and how we are to approach prayer boldly and confidently like we're talking to a friend. And so one cool thing that the author's done throughout the book is he's quoted different psalms, and he's gone back and said, for it is written, and he's quoted different past biblical books and quoted them in his book. But today, the author, it was almost like the author kind of hid it a little bit. You had to do a little bit of thinking, a little bit of looking to find where he was actually paraphrasing in this. So yeah, back to Hebrews chapter 12. So in Hebrews chapter 12, the writer, he's talking about this idea of the old covenant versus the new covenant. And so the old covenant being when God gave Moses the 10 commandments and said, you will be fruitful, you will multiply, you will inherit the promised land, all these different things if you keep these commandments. And the new covenant being our relationship with Jesus. Now that Jesus took death on the cross, took the eternal sacrifice on the cross, we have a new covenant where we can have a relationship with God and we're forgiven and we're saved through faith, not by works. And that's the new covenant. And so all throughout the book of Hebrews, there's different kind of metaphors that the author uses to compare the old covenant to the new covenant, and how the new covenant is superior to the old covenant because now it's no longer what we do, it's what he's already done. And today in Hebrews chapter 12, it's no different. He uses another metaphor here, and he's talking about, so Moses gets the 10 commandments on Mount Sinai. He goes up onto the mountain called Mount Sinai, and he receives the 10 commandments from God, goes down back to the people and gives the people the 10 commandments. And so all throughout the book today, specifically here in Hebrews. So now in Hebrews chapter 12, when I'm reading it today, I get to verse 18. It says, you have not come to a physical mountain, to a place of flaming fire, darkness, gloom, and whirlwind, as the Israelites did at Mount Sinai. And so it goes on and talks about how they heard God's voice and they heard God speaking to them and told them all about the new commandments he was giving them and all these different things. But the point here is that those people came to a physical mountain and received the physical commandments on the stone tablets from God, and that was represented as the old covenant. But then a couple verses later here in verse 22, it says, no, you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to countless thousands of angels in joyful gathering. You have come to the assembly of God's firstborn children, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God himself, who's the judge over all things. You have come to the spirits of the righteous ones in heaven, who have now been made perfect. You have come to Jesus, the one who mediates the covenant between God and people, and to the sprinkled blood, which speaks of forgiveness instead of crying out for vengeance like the blood of Abel. And so to break it down here, it says, it keeps stating over and over again, you have come, you have come, you have come. And each of these sentences is a metaphor that we've now come to a new covenant. We've come to an eternal Mount Zion. We've come to an eternal heavenly Jerusalem. We've come to the assembly of God's firstborn children. Like we've come to God himself, who's the judge of all things. We've come to God in relationship now, and we've come to God in the new covenant. Under the new covenant, it ends by saying we've come to Jesus himself, who mediates the new covenant between God and people. We've come to the sprinkled blood, which speaks of forgiveness instead of crying out for vengeance. And so the point that he's trying to make here is that we've no longer come like the Israelites did to the physical Mount Sinai to receive the 10 commandments from God. We've come to the eternal covenant. We've come to the eternal mountain to receive Jesus. We've come to receive a relationship with Jesus through faith. And so he's trying to make a distinction here that we're no longer under this old covenant. We're under a new covenant of Jesus, of relationship. And so I kept reading because I hadn't put all this together inside my head yet. I later prayed about it, and I understood it a lot better after. But I kept reading, and you get to verse 25, and it makes another connection here. It says that just like the people of Israel, when Moses goes up to the mountain and receives the 10 commandments from God, they heard the voice of God there, and they heard what God was saying to them. And later on, they failed to obey this covenant. They fell into idolatry. They fell into different things. And it says, be careful that you do not refuse to listen to the one who is speaking. It says, for if the people of Israel did not escape when they refused to listen to Moses, the earthly messenger, we will certainly not escape if we reject the one who speaks to us from heaven. And it's saying, so if the people of Israel didn't obey their covenant and they didn't escape from an earthly messenger like Moses, we've received an eternal messenger in Jesus. And if we don't accept him, if we run away from him, don't think we're going to escape. And so it keeps going, and it says, when God spoke from Mount Sinai, his voice shook the earth. But now he makes another promise. Once again, I will shake not only the earth, but the heavens also. This means that all of creation will be shaken and removed, so that only the unshakable things will remain. And so that's like it hits you hard, that verse. And so that's why I looked into it a little bit more. So God's saying that if he shook the earth when he spoke from Mount Sinai, how much more on the day of judgment, when Jesus comes back, will he speak and shake the earth? And it says that all of creation is going to shake under God's voice, and that only the unshakable things will remain. So I know I'm just rambling on here, but if you just give me a second, this is all going to connect and make sense. So I looked up that word unshakable, stood out to me a lot, because it says that only the unshakable things will remain. And inside my head, I was like, well, it says that those who believe in Jesus will remain on the day of judgment, will be saved. And so the fact that it now says the unshakable things will remain, that interested me a little bit. So I went to Google and I just looked up Bible verses that use the word unshakable in them. And so I ended up coming across, the only one I could really find was Psalms 125, and it was the Passion Translation. And that's a translation I'd never really read before, but I heard like really good things about it. And so I clicked on it and went to Psalm 125. And you get to Psalm 125. And like I said, don't forget what I was saying, that the author of Hebrews references to Psalms a lot. But this time, he didn't like make a clear like citation or something that like this was from the Psalms. Like he like said a couple things about Mount Zion and about the new heavenly Jerusalem. And then he kept talking for a few more verses before he talked about unshakable, and those who remain, and those who are unshakable will remain on the day of judgment. And so I went to Psalm 125 here after I looked it up and I found it. So in Psalm 125, verse 1 reads, "Those who trust in the Lord are as unshakable, as unmovable as mighty Mount Zion. Just as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord's wraparound presence surrounds his people, protecting them now and forever." That's verses 1 and 2. And so I read that, and that stood out to me, because it says that those who trust in the Lord are as unshakable as mighty Mount Zion. And so that word unshakable, it says that the reason they're unshakable is because the Lord's wraparound presence surrounds his people, protecting them now and forever. And so that kind of hit me. And I was like, that a couple of days before that, I had been thinking about prayer. And that was one thing that had stood out to me over the past couple of weeks, about what just prayer as a topic had been on my mind a lot lately. And so I read that and I was like, that's definitely talking about prayer. The Lord's wraparound presence surround his people. If you're not in a relationship with God, if you're not talking to God, the Lord's presence is not there. And so the way we run to that presence is in prayer, in worship, in reading the word. Like when I say prayer, I just mean basically kind of your quiet time. And that's when we feel the Lord's presence, and the Lord's presence is there. So that word unshakable, what that means in order to remain unshakable, because those are the ones that are going to last forever. When it says that the Lord shakes the earth, the unshakable ones, in order to remain unshakable, what that means is drawing your strength from the Lord. And so the way we draw our strength from the Lord is through committing to spending time with him, and through committing to give him the real us, not the fake church version of us, but giving him the real us and drawing our strength from him and building that relationship with him. And what I just realized as I was reading this and kind of going back through it one more time, like just like this psalm, these two verses are what Hebrews 12, these verses, I think it was 15 through 29, are talking all about. These two verses, they're not quoted like some of the Psalms were, but they're written out as if they were the almost like the inspiration behind what the writer's trying to say here. He uses the terms unmovable as Mount Zion, as mighty Mount Zion. He uses the terms just as the mountains surround Jerusalem. Just like in Hebrews 12, if we go back and we look at Hebrews 12, let me find what verse it was. Hebrews 12:22, it uses those same references. You have come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. And so it's clear here that the author of Hebrews was using this psalm as an inspiration behind what he was writing. And so what I get from this that I thought was just a really cool thing I could share is that in order to remain unshakable into it, when it says we have come, like Hebrews 12:22 says, we have come to Mount Zion, we have come to the city of God. And later, after it says we have come, it says we have come to Jesus, the one who mediates the new covenant between God and people, and to the sprinkled blood, which speaks of forgiveness. And so in order to come to Jesus, in order to come to the sprinkled blood, it's equated to coming to Mount Zion, coming to the heavenly Jerusalem. And so those things, those when it says you have come, you have come, you have come, those things are equal. They all mean the same thing. And ultimately they mean we have come to God. And when it says we have come to God, what it means, if we go to Psalm 125, is that we have come to the Lord's presence. We have come to time with him. We have come to draw our strength from him. And so I think that was just something really cool that hit me hard that day, is that, like, the point of this passage is not to say we have believed in Jesus. The point of the passage is not to say that we have been baptized. We have been, like, we've done all the things. That would have been maybe something that would have been on the commandments list. That would have been the old covenant. We've done the things. But the new covenant says that when we say we've come to Jesus, we have a relationship with him, and we talk to him, and we actually get to know him, and we learn to hear his voice. And those things stood out to me that I had not thought about before. And I also think there's a point to be made that as we wrap it up and as the end of the chapter comes, verses 28 and 29 say, "Since we are receiving a kingdom that is unshakable, let us be thankful and please God by worshiping him with holy fear and awe, for our God is a devouring fire." And so I think it makes a good point there to say that, yes, we are receiving this relationship from God. It's no longer work-based. It's no longer we're going to do the things over and over and we're going to try to earn salvation. But it doesn't want us, it wants us to rely on relationship with God, but it doesn't want us to forsake what God tells us to do. It ends the chapter by reminding us, if we say we truly love God and if we say we truly want to pursue a relationship with him, we're going to have a respect for him. John 14:15 says, "If you love me, you will obey my commands." And so as we need to be pursuing relationship, not religion and doing the things with God, but we need to make sure that we're also giving God respect and we're worshiping him with holy fear and awe. Holy fear just means understanding that we are nothing without him. So we're going to live every day obeying him and staying away from sin and choosing to please God with the way we live. And so it ends by saying, "For our God is a devouring fire," just saying that our God has the power. When it says the fear of God, it means our God has the power to, God has given us the power to choose life or choose death. And so we need to make sure every day we're choosing life and choosing to obey him and choosing to love him. So ultimately, to kind of sum it up, like, if we're basing our faith in God on religion, on the old covenant of the Mount Sinai, of the physical, if we're basing it on doing the physical things, like about, just like we said in Hebrews 12:18, it says we've not come to a physical mountain. If we are basing our faith on the physical, doing the things and going to church, and even when I say reading the Bible and praying, I don't mean that those are not great things. I mean that if we're basing our faith on, if we're just checking the box each day, then that is a shakeable faith, that on the day of judgment, that faith will be shaken. And so instead, what it's calling us to do is to base our faith on a relationship with God, because that's unshakable. Because when we fail, if we're based on a relationship with God, his righteousness covers us and his goodness is what covers us. So then even when our circumstances or our emotions shake us, we are unshakable, because even though we may be shaking, our feet are planted in Christ. And so that's just the one thing that I thought really stood out to me and just kind of convicted me, but also gave me like a really deep sense of peace of, like, God really like just showed me that, because it was something that he wanted people to see. He wanted us to understand is that if we have to be based on a relationship with Christ, and the only way we can be in a relationship with Christ if we're constantly in his presence, if we're constantly in a relationship with him, if we're constantly in the secret place praying and just talking with God and getting to know him more. So I hope that just kind of encourages people, and that was something that really helped me and stood out to me, and just, yeah.